The desert night was restless. Forward operating base Ironclad sat like a scar on the New Mexico wasteland, a collection of concrete bunkers and sandbag walls that had seen too many rotations, too many wars that never made the news. The air tasted of diesel fuel and dust. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, coyotes howled at a moon that didn't care. Inside the base, men moved with a particular exhaustion that comes from fighting an enemy you can't see until it's too late. SEAL Team Hammer had returned 90 minutes ago. 12 men had left at dawn. 9 came back. 2 were confirmed dead. 1 was missing, presumed captured. The math of war was always brutal, always simple. Commander Garrett Blackwood stood in the command center, a converted storage container with maps taped to metal walls and radio equipment that crackled with static. His face was carved from stone in shadow. 42 years old, 20 years in the teams, and he'd never lost this many men in a single operation. Around him, his operators sat or stood in various states of damage. Corporal Isaiah Grant, 22 years old and bleeding through a tourniquet on his thigh, leaned against the wall with eyes that had aged a decade in 18 hours. Senior Chief Roland McKenzie, a bear of a man with a Scottish accent that got thicker when he was angry, cleaned his rifle with movements that were more ritual than necessity. Lieutenant Dalton Reeves paced like a caged animal. 28, sharp-featured, the kind of man who questioned everything and trusted nothing until it was proven in blood. The silence in the room was heavier than the desert heat. Blackwood's hand rested on the map of Devil's Canyon, 15 miles northeast. Red marks indicated enemy positions. Blue marks showed where his men had been pinned down for 6 hours, fighting against numbers that should have been impossible. Intel had said it was a small cell, 20, maybe 30 fighters. Intel had been wrong. The radio on the table hissed with encrypted chatter. Somewhere out there, SEAL Team Viper was holding a compound with walls that wouldn't stop a determined assault. 8 men, 4 wounded, and an enemy that had learned patience. Team Viper's leader was Lieutenant Harlan Cross, a man Blackwood had trained with years ago. Cross was steady under fire, the kind of operator who'd hold a position until the walls came down around him. His last transmission had been clipped, professional, but Blackwood heard the strain beneath it. Viper holding, ammunition critical, request immediate air support. That had been 20 minutes ago. No air support had come. Blackwood looked up. His eyes swept the room. 40 people, mechanics, communications specialists, medics, logistics personnel. The kind of men and women who kept a forward operating base running, but rarely saw combat. His voice cut through the room like a blade through water. Any combat pilots here? The question hung in the air for 3 full seconds. Heads turned, eyes met. Men glanced at each other with the universal expression that meant the answer was no. A radio operator shook his head. A medic looked down at his boots. The base chaplain, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, offered nothing but a sympathetic grimace. Blackwood felt the answer before anyone spoke it. They had armor. They had ammunition. They had the finest warriors the United States had ever produced. But they didn't have the one thing that could change the geometry of the fight. They didn't have air support. And then, from the back of the room, there was movement. Not dramatic, not sudden, just the quiet scrape of a boot against concrete. A figure stood from where she'd been half hidden behind a stack of equipment crates. She was maybe 5'7", dressed in battle dress utilities that were smeared with hydraulic fluid and engine grease. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail that hadn't seen a mirror in days. An Air Force patch clung to her shoulder, faded but unmistakable. She didn't announce herself, didn't call attention. She simply stood, and in that standing, every eye in the room turned toward her. Blackwood's gaze locked onto her face. She was maybe 34, with the kind of features that would have been called pretty in civilian life, but here just looked worn. There was a small scar above her left eyebrow. Her hands, visible at her sides, were stained with oil and marked with small burns. "I can fly," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. It didn't waver under the weight of 40 people staring at her. Senior Chief Mackenzie spoke first, his Scottish brogue thick with skepticism. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you look like you fix radios, not fly gunships." A few men shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't hostility, it was doubt. In their world, trust wasn't given freely, it was earned in fire. The woman didn't flinch. She met Mackenzie's gaze directly. "Call sign Valkyrie," she said. "62 combat missions. Afghanistan, 2019 to 2021. The room went still. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Something in his memory shifted, clicked into place like the bolt of a rifle. "Wait," he said slowly. "Operation Sandstorm. You're that Valkyrie?" Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. A shadow. A ghost. "Yes, sir." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. Operation Sandstorm wasn't classified, but it wasn't talked about either. August 2021, Kandahar Province. 47 Marines cut off from support, surrounded by Taliban fighters in terrain that made extraction impossible. 2 A-10 Thunderbolts had flown into a firestorm to pull them out. One pilot had made it home. The other hadn't. Blackwood studied her face. He was good at reading people. You had to be, when men's lives depended on knowing who would hold and who would break. What he saw in Captain Elena Thorne's eyes wasn't fear. It was guilt. "Captain Davis," Blackwood said quietly. "He was your wingman." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He was. The report said he took ground fire covering your position, ejected over hostile territory." "That's correct. They recovered his body 3 days later." Elena said nothing, but her hands, hanging at her sides, curled into fists so tight her knuckles went white. Reeves spoke up from across the room, his voice carrying an edge. "So you're the pilot who got her wingman killed?" The words landed like a punch. Mackenzie shot Reeves a warning look, but the younger lieutenant didn't back down. Elena turned her gaze to Reeves. When she spoke, her voice was still quiet, but there was steel beneath it. "Captain Jeremiah Davis was the finest pilot I ever flew with. He made a choice. He positioned himself between a surface-to-air missile and 47 Marines who would have died without us. That missile was meant for me. He took it instead." She paused. "So yes, Lieutenant, I'm the pilot who watched her wingman die over a radio while I flew home. I'm the pilot who requested ground duty because I couldn't sit in a cockpit without seeing his face. And I'm the pilot standing in front of you right now, asking if you want my help, or if you'd prefer to keep trading accusations while Lieutenant Cross and 7 others run out of ammunition 15 miles from here." The silence that followed was absolute. Reeves held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked away first. Blackwood cleared his throat. "What do you fly, Captain?" "A-10 Thunderbolt." A murmur ran through the room. Even men who didn't know aircraft recognized that designation. The Warthog, the flying tank, the close air support platform that had saved more ground troops than any jet in the arsenal. Slow, ugly, indestructible, and absolutely terrifying to anyone on the receiving end of its 30mm rotary cannon. Blackwood's expression shifted. Not quite hope. Not yet, but possibility. "You're telling me you can get one of those in the air? Here?" Elena nodded once, sharp and precise. "Warhog 17 is on the strip. She's been grounded for 8 months, but she's intact. I can bring her up." Mackenzie leaned forward, frowning. "Ma'am, that bird hasn't had a pre-flight in half a year. You'd be flying a coffin held together with prayers and duct tape." "Then I'll make sure I pray harder," Elena said without a trace of humor. Blackwood studied her. In his career, he'd worked with hundreds of pilots. The good ones were confident. The great ones were humble. The best ones were the ones who'd been broken and put themselves back together. Elena Thorne had the eyes of someone who'd been shattered and had used the shards to rebuild something sharper. "Captain," Blackwood said carefully. You understand what you're saying. If you're wrong, if you can't deliver, men die tonight. I know what's at stake, Commander. Do you? Elena's voice didn't rise, but it cut deeper. I know that Lieutenant Cross and 7 others are holding a compound with ammunition they'll run out of in the next hour. I know that you've already lost 2 men today, and you're about to lose 8 more if something doesn't change. And I know that I'm the only person in this room who can fly that aircraft. She took a breath. You don't have to like me. You don't have to trust me. You just have to decide whether you want to keep standing here or give me 90 minutes to prove I can do what I say. Blackwood looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Mackenzie, at Reeves, at the other operators who'd fought their way back from hell. He looked at the map, at the red marks that represented an enemy closing in. Finally, he nodded. Show me the bird. The night air hit them like a furnace as they stepped outside. Elena led the way across the tarmac, her boots crunching on gravel. Behind her, Blackwood and 4 of his operators followed in silence. Reeves walked with his arms crossed, skepticism radiating from him like heat. Mackenzie moved with the careful gait of a man who'd been shot too many times to trust easy promises. The runway stretched ahead, barely lit by scattered flood lamps that cast long shadows across the desert floor. At the far end, beneath camouflage netting that fluttered in the wind, sat the silhouette of an aircraft that looked less like a machine and more like a sleeping predator. The A-10 Thunderbolt. Warhog 1-7. Even in the darkness, even motionless, it had presence. The twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, the straight wings designed for low-altitude flight, and protruding from the nose, unmistakable and brutal, the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon. A weapon so large the aircraft had essentially been built around it. As they approached, details emerged that made Reeves shake his head. Dust covered the canopy like a burial shroud. The tires were flat. Panels along the fuselage were secured with speed tape rather than proper fasteners. And along the right engine nacelle, clearly visible even in the dim light, were 3 bullet holes that had been marked with red paint but never patched. Jesus, Reeves muttered. This thing's a museum piece. Elena didn't respond. She moved to the nose of the aircraft and placed her hand on the barrel of the cannon, her fingers tracing the cold metal. Blackwood watched her carefully. When's the last time this bird flew? 8 months, Elena said without turning around. November, training exercise went wrong. Took ground fire. Pilot brought her back on 1 engine, but the damage was too extensive for field repairs. She's been waiting for parts that never came. And you think you can make her airworthy in 90 minutes? Elena finally turned to face him. I don't think, Commander. I know. I've been working on this bird every day for the last 3 months. I know every system, every flaw, every shortcut that'll get her airborne. Why? Mackenzie asked. His tone wasn't hostile anymore, just curious. If you're not flying, why spend 3 months fixing a plane you're never going to use? Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she moved to the side of the aircraft, reached up, and opened a small access panel near the canopy. From inside, she withdrew something wrapped in waterproof plastic. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a notebook, small, bound in leather, the edges worn from handling. She opened it to the last page and held it so the seals could see in the dim light. Handwriting. Neat. Precise. Military trained. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But this bird isn't. She's waiting for you. Fly her 1 more time. Bring them home. Davis, July 4th, 2021. The date had been written 2 days after Operation Sandstorm. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she closed the notebook. I fixed this plane, she said quietly, because Captain Davis asked me to, and because I owe him at least that much. No one spoke. The wind moved across the runway, carrying with it the smell of sage and distant gunfire. Finally, Blackwood nodded. What do you need? Crew Chief Thompson, hydraulic fluid, 90 minutes of nobody asking questions. You've got it. Elena looked at each of the SEALs in turn. Her gaze lingered on Reeves. I'm going to bring your men home, Lieutenant. I don't care if you believe me or not, but by 01:15 hours, this bird will be in the air. Reeves held her stare. Then slowly he gave a single nod. It wasn't trust, but it was a start. Thompson arrived 10 minutes later. He was 60 years old with hands that looked like they'd been carved from oak and a face that suggested he'd seen every type of aircraft malfunction God had ever invented. When Blackwood explained the situation, Thompson simply nodded, grabbed his toolkit, and followed Elena to the Warthog without a word. The SEALs watched from a distance as the two of them went to work. Elena moved with a precision that spoke of muscle memory. She climbed the access ladder, popped panels, checked connections. Thompson worked the ground systems, hydraulics, fuel lines, electrical systems that had been dormant for months. 23-30 hours. Inside the command center, new intel was coming in. An intelligence officer, pale and sweating despite the air conditioning, approached Blackwood with a tablet. Sir, we've intercepted enemy communications. The force at Devil's Canyon, it's not a cell. It's a coordinated assault. We're looking at 200 plus hostiles, maybe more. Blackwood's jaw tightened. Command? Colonel Khalid al-Mazari. The name meant nothing to most of the room, but to the intelligence officer, it meant everything. Sir, al-Mazari is former Iraqi Air Force, trained in Russia. He's been operating in this region for 8 months. In that time, he's shot down 4 NATO aircraft using surface-to-air missiles. He specializes in hunting A-10s. Blackwood felt ice slide down his spine. How? He studies tactics, learns flight patterns. He's turned anti-air warfare into a science. The intelligence officer pulled up grainy footage on the tablet. A nighttime engagement, an A-10 caught in the crosshairs of a missile system. The moment of impact, the fireball. Al-Mazari doesn't just shoot down planes, sir. He waits for them. He baits them. And when they commit to a gun run, he kills them. Blackwood stared at the screen. Then he looked out the window toward the runway, where Elena Thorne was working under floodlights, trying to resurrect a dead aircraft. Does she know? Not yet. Blackwood closed his eyes, opened them. I'll tell her myself. Midnight came and went. Elena's hands were black with grease. Her shirt was soaked through with sweat. But the Warthog was coming alive. Thompson had replaced 3 hydraulic lines. Elena had rebooted the avionics suite using a workaround that involved bypassing 2 burned-out circuit boards. The fuel system, which had been contaminated with sediment, was flushed and refilled. At 00:10 hours, Elena climbed into the cockpit. The seat was exactly as she'd left it 8 months ago. The same worn padding, the same faint smell of jet fuel and fear. She strapped in. Her hands found the controls without thinking. Throttle, stick, master arm. Everything was exactly where it should be. For a moment, she just sat there, eyes closed, breathing. She could hear Davis's voice in her memory. You're the best damn pilot I've ever flown with, Elena. Don't you forget that. She opened her eyes. Outside, Thompson gave her a thumbs up. Systems were green. Elena flipped the battery switch. The panel before her flickered to life, dim at first, struggling, then brightening as power flowed through circuits that had been dormant for too long. She reached for the engine start sequence. Her finger hovered over the switch, and then she pressed it. The right engine coughed, sputtered, belched black smoke that made Thompson step back. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then with a roar that shook the night, the engine caught. The turbines spun up, whining into life, and suddenly the Warthog was no longer a corpse. It was breathing. Elena didn't wait. She started the left engine. This one came easier, coughing only twice before settling into a steady growl. From the command center, the SEALs heard it. That sound, the sound of an A-10's engines, unmistakable and primal. Men stepped outside to watch. On the runway, beneath floodlights, the Warthog sat with both engines running, exhaust shimmering in the heat, ready. Elena ran through her checklist. Hydraulics, green. Fuel, 90 minutes. She'd managed to squeeze extra fuel from the reserves. Ammunition. She checked the counter and her heart sank. 580 rounds, not the standard 1,150. Someone had offloaded half the drum during the last maintenance cycle and never refilled it. She had 2 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, no rocket pods, 90 minutes of fuel, 580 rounds of 30mm ammunition, 2 missiles. It would have to be enough. Blackwood's voice crackled over the radio. "Valkyrie, we need to talk." Elena keyed her mic. "I'm on the clock, Commander. Make it fast." The enemy commander at Devil's Canyon, his name is Khalid al-Mazari, former Iraqi Air Force pilot. He shot down 4 A-10s in the last 8 months. He studies tactics, learns patterns. If you fly into that canyon, he's going to be waiting for you. Elena stared at the horizon, the dark line where the desert met the sky. Understood. Captain, he's specifically trained to kill warthogs. He'll have surface-to-air missiles positioned on high ground. He'll wait for you to commit to a gun run, and then he'll fire. I said, "I understand, Commander." There was a pause. "You're still going?" It wasn't a question. Elena looked down at the notebook sitting on the console beside her. Davis's handwriting. "Bring them home." "Affirmative. I'm still going." Another pause. Then Blackwood's voice, quieter. "Godspeed, Valkyrie." Elena didn't respond. She locked the canopy, sealing herself inside. The world outside became muffled, reduced to the roar of engines and the glow of instruments. She taxied forward. The warthog rolled slowly at first, heavy and ungainly on the ground, but obedient. At the edge of the runway she saw them, the SEALs, all 9 of them standing in a line. Blackwood in the center, Mackenzie to his right, even Reeves, arms no longer crossed, standing at attention. As Elena passed, Mackenzie raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute. One by one, the others followed. Elena felt something crack inside her chest, but she didn't let it show on her face. She just nodded once, brief and sharp, and continued to the runway threshold. 0110 hours. She lined up on the center line, ran the engines to full power. The warthog shook like something alive, eager, angry. The tower crackled. "Warhog 17, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds calm. Good hunting." Elena pushed the throttles forward. The A-10 surged down the runway, slow at first, then faster, the nose lifting at 130 knots. The wheels left the ground and the desert fell away beneath her. She climbed into the night sky, alone, with half the ammunition she needed and an enemy who knew exactly how to kill her. Behind her, on the ground, Blackwood stood watching until the warthog's lights disappeared into the darkness. Reeves stepped up beside him. "Sir, you really think she can pull this off?" Blackwood didn't answer immediately. He just watched the empty sky where the aircraft had vanished. Finally, he spoke. "Lieutenant, that woman just started a dead plane with spare parts and willpower. She's flying into a kill box designed specifically for her. And she's doing it because 8 men she's never met are about to die." He turned to look at Reeves. "I don't think she can pull it off. I know she will. Because she's already proven the most important thing." "What's that, sir?" "She's not flying for herself. She's flying for them. And that, Lieutenant, is the only thing that matters." In the distance, thunder rolled across the desert. But it wasn't a storm. It was the sound of an A-10 Thunderbolt, low and fast, heading toward Devil's Canyon, heading toward war. The Valkyrie had risen, and the night was about to burn. The desert stretched below like an ocean of darkness. Elena flew at 400 feet, low enough to stay under most radar, high enough to give her reaction time if something went wrong. The warthog cut through the night air with a sound like tearing fabric, engines growling their steady rhythm. 140 knots, fast enough, slow enough to see everything. Her eyes moved constantly. HUD display, horizon, fuel gauge, Threat warning receiver. The cockpit was a cathedral of green light and shadow, and she was alone in it. 15 miles to Devil's Canyon. The radio crackled with encrypted chatter. Team Viper's frequency. She could hear the tension beneath the professional calm. Contact right. 2 tangos moving on the east wall. Copy. Engaging. The sharp crack of rifle fire, distant and tinny through the speaker. We're down to 30% ammunition, Lieutenant. Maybe 20 minutes of sustained fire. A different voice, younger, scared but holding it together. Then Lieutenant Harlan Cross, calm as if he were ordering coffee. Acknowledged. Conserve your shots. Make them count. Valkyrie is inbound. Elena keyed her mic. Hammer Viper, this is Valkyrie. I have you on thermal. 12 minutes out. Cross responded immediately. Copy, Valkyrie. Situation is deteriorating. We have 2 KIA, 6 effectives, 4 wounded. Enemy is massing for final assault. 2 dead, 6 left alive. Elena's jaw tightened. She pushed the throttle forward slightly. The Warthog accelerated. 11 minutes. Below her, the terrain changed. Flat desert gave way to broken ground, rocky outcroppings that cast moon shadows like spilled ink. This was the approach to Devil's Canyon, a natural formation that had been fought over for centuries by different armies under different flags. Tonight it would be fought over again. Her threat warning receiver chirped once. Not a lock, just a sweep. Someone down there had radar. Someone was looking for her. Colonel Khalid al-Mazari, the hunter. Elena thought about what Blackwood had told her. 4 NATO aircraft shot down, all A-10s, all killed during gun runs when they were committed, predictable, vulnerable. Khalid had studied her type of aircraft the way a surgeon studied anatomy. He knew where to cut, but he didn't know her. Not yet. 10 minutes out, she saw it. Devil's Canyon opened up ahead like a wound in the earth. 2 miles long, half a mile wide, with walls that rose 300 feet on either side. At the eastern end, a small compound, probably an old ranch or mining operation, sat surrounded by makeshift fortifications. That's where Team Viper was making their stand. Elena switched her targeting pod to thermal imaging. The screen bloomed with heat signatures, too many to count. Clusters of white figures surrounding the compound from 3 sides. North, west, south. The east was open terrain, but that was a killing field with no cover. 200 contacts, maybe more, and in the center, 6 tiny signatures. Cooler, stationary, conserving energy. Team Viper. 6 men holding against 200. The math was impossible. Elena zoomed the thermal image tighter. She could see the tactical situation now. Mortar team on the northeast ridge, 3 men in a tube. Technical trucks in the southwest approach. 6 vehicles with heavy machine guns. And a mass of infantry in the center, probably 180 fighters, preparing to rush the compound. Her fingers moved across the weapons panel. She armed the GAU-8 cannon. The vibration changed slightly as the system came online. The massive 7-barreled rotary weapon beneath her feet, preparing to speak. 580 rounds. That was 4.7 seconds of continuous fire. She would have to make those seconds count. Hammer Viper, Valkyrie on station. I have visual on your position. 3 primary targets identified. Mortar team northeast, technical convoy southwest, infantry mass center. Request you mark your position with IR strobe. Cross's voice came back steady. Copy, Valkyrie, marking now. On her thermal display, one of the heat signatures inside the compound began flashing. Infrared strobe light, invisible to the naked eye, bright as a star on her sensors. Visual confirmed, Elena said. Stand by for fire. She banked left, beginning her approach run. The Warthog responded sluggishly. The damaged hydraulics made her inputs feel loose, imprecise. But the bird held together. Below, the mortar team was setting up for another shot. She could see them clearly now on the thermal. 3 men, 1 feeding rounds, one adjusting elevation, one preparing to fire. They had no idea she was above them. Elena nosed down, the altimeter unwound. 400 feet, 350, 300, 250. The target reticle on her HUD centered on the mortar position. Her thumb found the trigger. She exhaled slowly and fired. The GAU-8 Avenger opened up with a sound that could only be described as God tearing the sky in half. Bert! Not a series of shots, but a single prolonged roar, a sound so deep and violent it could be felt in the bones. 2.5 seconds, 100 rounds. 30-millimeter depleted uranium rounds screamed downward at 3,900 feet per second. Each projectile hit with the force of a small car moving at highway speed. The mortar position ceased to exist. Rock exploded into dust. The mortar tube disintegrated. The three men were simply gone, erased from the earth in a fraction of a second. Elena pulled up hard. 4.5 Gs pushed her into the seat. The warthog groaned, but climbed. The radio erupted. Direct hit! Valkyrie, that's a direct hit. Mortar position destroyed, Cross's voice. And beneath the professional calm, there was something else. Relief. Hope. Elena leveled off at 600 feet and banked right, already lining up her next target. But before she could acquire, her threat warning receiver shrieked. Missile lock. The sound was high-pitched, urgent, designed to trigger every survival instinct. Elena reacted on pure muscle memory. Chaff and flares punched out from the warthog's dispensers. Bursts of heat and metal confetti designed to confuse infrared and radar seekers. She yanked the stick hard left and dove. The missile came from the northern ridge. An SA-18 Grouse, Russian-made, shoulder-fired, designed specifically to kill low-flying aircraft. It tracked her through the first turn. Elena watched it on her display, a white streak closing fast. She fired more flares, rolled the aircraft inverted, pulled through into a descending spiral. The missile followed for 3 seconds. Then it saw a flare that burned hotter than her engines and veered off, detonating 40 feet from her left wing. The shockwave hit like a fist. The warthogs shuddered. Alarms beeped. But the titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit did its job. She rolled upright, heart hammering, and climbed. Valkyrie, you good? Cross's voice, tense. Still here, Elena managed. Her hands were shaking slightly. She tightened her grip on the stick. Sam launched from Northern Ridge, engaging. But even as she said it, her mind was racing. That missile had been waiting, positioned, ready. Khalid al-Mazari had known she would come, had known she would target the mortar team first, had positioned his surface-to-air missiles accordingly. He had studied her tactics, and he'd been right. The realization sent ice through her veins. He knows how I fly. She keyed her radio to a different frequency. Base operations. The intelligence officer. Ironclad intel, Valkyrie. Requesting immediate analysis. Enemy SAM positions, how many? The reply came back 30 seconds later. Valkyrie, Ironclad. Signal intercepts suggest 2 SAM teams. Repeat, 2 teams. 4 missiles total. Wait 1, we're translating captured radio traffic. Elena circled at 800 feet while she waited, watching the canyon below. The enemy infantry was still massing. They hadn't committed to the assault yet. They were waiting for something. Waiting for her to make another predictable gun run. The intelligence officer came back on the radio. His voice was tight. Valkyrie, translation complete. Enemy commander Khalid to SAM 2. Quote, she flies aggressive, low altitude, predictable gun runs, same as Sandstorm. End quote. Valkyrie, he studied your previous missions. He's anticipating your tactics. Elena closed her eyes for half a second. Operation Sandstorm. Of course, that mission had been widely documented. After-action reports, helmet cam footage. Khalid would have had access to all of it through Russian or Iranian intelligence networks. He knew her playbook. Every gun run she'd made in Afghanistan, he'd watched. Every attack pattern, every approach angle, every evasive maneuver. He knew her as well as she knew herself. For a moment, doubt crept in, cold and insidious. If he knows my tactics, how do I beat him? Then she thought about the 6 men on the ground, Cross and 5 others, running out of ammunition, waiting for her to save them. She thought about Davis, who'd taken a missile meant for her. The doubt crystallized into something harder. If he knows my old tactics, then I'll give him new ones. Elena keyed her mic. Hammer Viper, Valkyrie, change of plan. I need you to designate targets for me. Cross responded, confused. Designate? We don't have a laser designator. Your rifle optic, PEQ-15 laser. You can paint targets with it. I'll lock onto the reflection with my Mavericks. Standoff engagement. I won't have to commit to low gun runs. There was a pause, then Cross, understanding. Copy, we can do that. What's your first target? Elena zoomed her thermal imaging on the northern ridge, where the first missile had come from. The SAM team would have moved after firing, but they couldn't have gone far. The terrain was too rough. She scanned the ridgeline systematically and found them. A heat signature in a shallow cave, partially concealed. 3 men, and the distinctive shape of an SA-18 launcher. Northern Ridge, Elena said. Cave position at coordinates November 7, 3, 2, 4, 5. Can you laze it? Stand by. 15 seconds of silence. Then Cross. Lasing now. On Elena's targeting display, a tiny pinpoint of reflected laser light appeared. The Maverick missile's seeker head saw it immediately and locked on. Good tone, Elena confirmed. Missile away. She pressed the release. The AGM-65 Maverick dropped from the right-wing pylon, motor ignited, and accelerated toward the cave. Elena counted. 18 seconds of flight time at this range. She watched the thermal display. The missile was a white streak. Then it disappeared into the cave entrance. 1 second. 2 seconds. The cave lit up like a camera flash. Not just the missile explosion. Secondary detonations. The SAM team's remaining missiles cooking off in the confined space. The entire ridgeline shuddered. Rock collapsed. When the dust cleared, the cave entrance had been sealed. SAM Team 1, eliminated. Splash 1 SAM position, Elena reported. Viper, excellent work. Next target, technical convoy, southwest approach. But even as she said it, the situation below changed. The enemy infantry began moving. Not the full assault. A probing attack. 40 fighters rushing the compound from the west, trying to exploit the gap left by the destroyed mortar team. On the radio, she heard Team Viper engage. The distinctive crack, crack, crack of M4 rifles, then the deeper thump of a grenade launcher. Contact west, multiple tangos 40 plus. Conserve ammo, aimed shots only. The thermal display showed the enemy fighters advancing in a loose skirmish line, using cover, moving with discipline. These weren't untrained insurgents. These were experienced fighters. And Team Viper was about to be overwhelmed. Elena made a decision. The technical convoy could wait. The SAM team could wait. Right now, those 40 fighters were the immediate threat. She nosed down, accelerating. Viper, break contact and take cover. Danger close fire incoming. Copy. All stations, get down, get down. Elena dove to 300 feet. Too low, dangerously low. But she needed accuracy. The infantry mass spread below her. She could see individual heat signatures now. Men running, taking positions behind rocks. She centered the reticle on the leading edge of the assault and fired. The GAU-8 roared again. 3 seconds, 120 rounds. The effect was apocalyptic. A line of earth 40 meters long simply erupted. Dust and rock and bodies thrown into the air. The 30-millimeter rounds hit the ground and ricocheted, fragmenting, creating a zone of absolute lethality. 15 fighters died in that 3-second burst. 20 more were wounded, screaming, crawling for cover. The assault broke. The survivors turned and ran back toward their own lines. Discipline forgotten, survival instinct overwhelming training. Elena pulled up and climbed, breathing hard. 360 rounds remaining. One Maverick missile left, and she still hadn't dealt with the technical convoy or the second SAM team. Below, Cross came on the radio. His voice was shaking slightly. "Valkyrie, that was danger close. We felt the impacts through the walls." "Apologies," Elena said, "but they're retreating." "Negative apologies needed. You just saved our lives. Again." Elena allowed herself a thin smile. Then it faded, because her threat warning receiver was beeping again. Not a lock, just a search radar, sweeping, looking. Khalid was still out there. SAM Team 2, waiting. She had to find them before they found her. Then the radio crackled. Not from Team Viper, from Ironclad Base. "Valkyrie, Ironclad, we have a situation." Elena's stomach dropped. "Go ahead." "Friendly QRF inbound to your position. Marine Rifle Platoon, 2-8 personnel, coming from Firebase Grizzly to reinforce Viper. ETA 12 minutes. But we've intercepted enemy communications. Hostile convoy moving to intercept them at Route Scorpion. 15 vehicles, 100+ fighters. If that convoy reaches the highway first, our QRF walks into an ambush." Elena looked at her fuel gauge. 54 minutes remaining. She looked at the thermal display. Team Viper was holding, barely. She looked at the map. Route Scorpion was 11 miles northwest. If she left now, she could intercept the enemy convoy before it reached the highway. But that meant leaving Team Viper unprotected, leaving Cross and 5 others to face 200 enemies alone. The radio crackled again. Cross's voice. He'd been listening to the same frequency. He knew what she just heard. "Valkyrie," he said quietly, "how long can you stay on station with us?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She thought about the math. 6 men here, 28 men at Route Scorpion, 34 lives total. She thought about what Davis would say, what Davis would do. Then she thought about what the right answer was, regardless of what it cost her. "Viper, I'm redirecting," she said. The words tasted like ash. "You'll have to hold." Silence on the radio. Long enough that she thought Cross might argue. Then his voice came back accepting. "Copy, Valkyrie. We'll hold. Do what you have to do." Elena's hand trembled on the stick. She banked the Warthog northwest, away from Devil's Canyon, toward Route Scorpion, away from the 6 men she'd promised to protect. The cockpit felt colder, emptier. She keyed her mic one more time. "Viper, I'll be back, I promise. 20 minutes. Hold for 20 minutes. Cross didn't respond. The Warthog flew northwest at maximum speed, 380 knots. The engines screamed. Fuel burned at an alarming rate. 48 minutes remaining. Elena's mind raced through the geometry of the problem. Route Scorpion was 11 miles. At this speed, she'd arrive in less than 2 minutes. The enemy convoy was moving at maybe 40 miles per hour on rough terrain. If she was fast enough, she could hit them before they reached the highway. Before they ambushed 28 Marines who had no idea they were walking into hell. But that meant leaving 6 men to die. Unless she could do both. Unless she could save everyone. The thought was arrogant. Impossible. She was one pilot in a damaged aircraft with half ammunition and limited fuel. But she was also the only chance any of them had. Elena pushed the throttle to maximum. The Warthogs shuddered but responded, straining every bolt and rivet. The desert blurred below. And then she saw it. Route Scorpion, a dirt highway cutting through the wasteland. And moving along it, headlights barely visible, a convoy of 15 trucks and technical vehicles. The enemy, 100 fighters, maybe more, armed with heavy machine guns, RPGs, small arms, heading directly toward the unsuspecting Marines. Elena checked her ammunition counter. 360 rounds. That was 4.5 seconds of fire. Not enough to destroy 15 vehicles. Not nearly enough. But she didn't need to destroy them all. She just needed to stop them. Elena armed the GAU-8 and began her dive. The convoy saw her too late. By the time the first technical truck opened fire with its mounted machine gun, Elena was already committed. She lined up on the center of the convoy. Not the lead vehicle, not the rear, the center. Maximum damage, maximum chaos. Her thumb found the trigger, and she fired everything she had left. 4.5 seconds of hell, 360 rounds of 30-millimeter depleted uranium hatred screaming downward at nearly 4,000 feet per second. The result was catastrophic. 8 trucks exploded simultaneously. Fuel tanks ruptured. Ammunition cooked off. Bodies were thrown into the air like rag dolls. The road itself disintegrated, leaving a crater 40 meters long. The survivors, those in the vehicles that hadn't been destroyed, panicked. Some trucks tried to reverse. Others veered off the road and got stuck in sand. Fighters jumped out and ran in every direction, abandoning their vehicles, their weapons, their mission. The convoy was finished, shattered, no longer a threat. Elena pulled up, breathing hard, hands shaking from adrenaline. 0 rounds remaining. 1 Maverick missile left. 38 minutes of fuel. And she was still 11 miles from Devil's Canyon, where 6 men were fighting for their lives. The radio crackled. "Valkyrie, this is QRF Actual. We saw the fireworks. Route is clear. We're moving through. Whatever you just did, you saved a lot of Marines tonight." Elena didn't feel triumphant. She felt sick. Because she just spent her last bullet on strangers while abandoning the men who trusted her. She turned the Warthog south, back toward Devil's Canyon, and pushed the engines to maximum. But before she'd gone 2 miles, something happened that made her blood freeze. Her right engine temperature spiked. Red warning light. Oil pressure dropping. One of the old bullet holes, the ones that had never been properly patched, had finally given way under the stress of maximum thrust. Oil was leaking. Temperature was climbing. In 90 seconds, that engine would seize, and she was still 9 miles from Team Viper. Elena made the hardest decision of her life. She shut down the right engine completely, cut fuel, feathered the propeller, watched as the temperature stabilized and the fire risk disappeared. Now she was flying on one engine. Thrust cut by 40%. Speed reduced to 220 knots. Fuel consumption actually increased because the remaining engine had to work harder. 18 minutes of fuel remaining, and 9 miles to go. The radio crackled. Cross's voice, strained, desperate. "Any station, this is Hammer Viper. We are being overrun. Repeat, we are being overrun. Multiple breaches. Hand to hand in the compound. If anyone is listening, we need help now." Elena stared at the distance indicator. 8 miles. At 220 knots, that was 2 minutes and 11 seconds. She looked at the fuel gauge. If she diverted any more power to speed, she wouldn't have enough fuel to make it back to base after extraction. She'd crash in the desert. But if she didn't get there in time, Cross and his men would die. Elena's hand moved to the throttle. She pushed it forward past the recommended maximum. The single engine screamed in protest. Temperature climbed into the red zone. The Warthog accelerated. 240 knots, 260, 280, fuel gauge dropping like a stone. 16 minutes, 14, 12. The airframe shook, metal groaned. Warning lights flashed across the panel like a Christmas tree. Elena ignored all of it. Her eyes were locked on one thing, the distance indicator. 7 miles, 6, 5, the radio. "Viper to any station, we are in the compound interior. 4 effectives remaining. Ammunition exhausted. This is our last transmission. Tell our families." "Negative." Elena's voice cut through, sharp as a blade. "Viper, Valkyrie is 2 minutes out. Do not give up. Do you hear me? Do not give up." Silence. Then Cross, his voice barely a whisper. "Valkyrie? You came back?" I promised, didn't I? 2 minutes. Find cover and stay alive for 2 minutes. 4 miles. 3. The warthog screamed through the night sky, trailing smoke from the dead right engine, the left engine burning itself to pieces, fuel down to 10 minutes. Elena could see Devil's Canyon ahead now, the firefight visible even from this distance. Muzzle flashes, explosions, 2 miles. And then her threat warning receiver wailed one final time. Missile lock, SAM Team 2, the one she'd never found. Khalid al-Mazari, patient hunter, had waited for exactly this moment, when she was damaged. Slow, predictable. The SA-18 launched from somewhere on the southern ridge. Elena saw it on her display, a white streak climbing fast. She had no ammunition, no flares left. One engine, no speed to evade. The missile was going to hit. Elena Thorne was going to die. But not before she got one more message out. She keyed her radio, voice calm, accepting. Viper, Valkyrie, I'm hit, going down. But I'm over your position. Watch the skies. And then, instead of trying to evade the missile, Elena did something insane. She dove straight toward it. The missile closed at over 2,000 feet per second. Elena dove toward it, the warthog screaming earthward on a single dying engine, smoke trailing behind like a funeral shroud. Every instrument on the panel was red. Every alarm wailed in desperate chorus. The airframe shuddered with vibrations that threatened to tear the aircraft apart. She had perhaps 3 seconds before impact. Her hand moved across the weapons panel one last time, not to arm anything, but to activate the one system she had left. The AGM-65 Maverick missile, still mounted on her left wing pylon. She couldn't fire it at the SAM. The Maverick was designed for ground targets, not air-to-air combat, but she could use it as a flare. Elena's thumb hit the emergency release at the exact moment she pulled the warthog into the most violent maneuver the damaged aircraft could survive. Not away from the missile, toward it, then under it, a split-second dodge that put the Maverick between her and the incoming SAM. The SA-18 Seekerhead saw the Maverick's motor ignite, saw a heat signature even brighter than the Warthog's engine. It made a decision in microseconds, the way machines do. It followed the brighter target. The two missiles met 300 feet above Elena's canopy. The explosion was tremendous, a fireball that turned night into day, shockwave radiating outward in a perfect sphere. The Warthog was caught in the edge of the blast. The canopy cracked further. Metal panels tore loose. The left wing bent upward at an angle that defied physics. But the aircraft held together. Because A-10s were built to take punishment and keep flying. Elena fought the controls as the Warthog tumbled through the shockwave. Altitude unwinding. 200 feet, 150, 100. The ground rushed up to meet her. She pulled back on the stick with both hands, every muscle straining. The nose came up, degree by agonizing degree. 50 feet, 40, 30. The Warthog leveled off at 20 feet above the desert floor, so low she could see individual rocks in her landing lights. She'd survived, but she wasn't celebrating, because now she had zero ammunition, zero missiles, one engine running on fumes, and 8 minutes of fuel remaining, and 6 men on the ground were still fighting for their lives. Elena looked down at Devil's Canyon as she flew over it. The thermal imaging showed the truth in stark detail. Team Viper's compound was breached, 80 enemy fighters inside the walls, 4 heat signatures that had to be crossed, and the remaining SEALs, backed into a single structure, surrounded. She had no weapons to help them, but she had something else. She had an A-10 Thunderbolt, and sometimes the weapon wasn't the gun, it was the fear. Elena keyed her radio. Viper, still alive, going in dry. Mark your position and take cover. Cross responded immediately, his voice hoarse. Valkyrie, you can't help us without weapons. Save yourself. Get out of here. Negative. Get down and stay down. That's an order. She didn't wait for his response. Elena pushed the throttle forward one more time. The single engine, already operating beyond its limits, somehow found more power. The temperature gauge climbed past every red line into zones that shouldn't exist. The Warthog accelerated to 340 knots, and Elena aimed it directly at the massive enemy fighters swarming the compound. She dropped to 100 feet, 50, 25. The engine noise became a roar that shook the canyon walls, a mechanical scream that sounded like the end of the world. The enemy fighters below looked up and saw death itself bearing down on them. Elena flew straight over the compound at 20 feet, the Warthog's shadow blocking out the moon. The engine roar so loud it drowned out gunfire, so terrifying it bypassed rational thought and struck directly at the primitive brainstem that controlled fear. The effect was immediate. Fighters scattered. Some dropped their weapons. Others dove for cover. 40 men broke and ran toward the canyon walls, convinced they were about to be strafed, that the 30-millimeter cannon was about to tear them apart. Team Viper, inside their structure, heard the roar and understood. Cross shouted to his men, "Now, while they're running!" 4 SEALs emerged from the building, wounded but moving. They fired their last magazines at the scattered enemies. 40 rounds of 5.56 NATO, aim shots, and 28 fighters went down. The survivors ran faster. Elena pulled up and banked hard, circling. She watched on thermal as the enemy formation disintegrated into chaos. She made another pass. Lower this time, 15 feet, fast enough that the wake turbulence knocked men off their feet. More fighters fled. The assault was collapsing. On the ground, Cross and his 3 remaining men sprinted from the compound toward the dry riverbed 600 meters north. The extraction point. 1 SEAL carried Corporal Isaiah Grant over his shoulders. Another limped on a leg wound, but kept moving. Elena circled above them like a guardian angel, the Warthog's engines screaming defiance at the night. She made a third pass over the enemy positions, this time at 10 feet, skimming the ground so close her landing gear nearly clipped a technical truck. The last organized resistance broke. Fighters abandoned their positions and fled into the darkness. Devil's Canyon belonged to the SEALs again. But Elena's victory was short-lived, because on the southern ridge, Colonel Khalid al-Mazari stood beside the ruins of his SAM position, watching the Warthog circle with the eyes of a man who devoted his life to killing American aircraft. He lifted a radio to his lips and spoke in English, on an open frequency he knew she'd be monitoring. "American pilot." Elena's blood went cold. She keyed her mic but said nothing. Khalid continued, his voice calm, almost conversational. "You fly like the woman from Operation Sandstorm. The attack patterns are identical. The courage is the same. You killed my younger brother that day, Captain Rashid al-Mazari. He commanded the convoy your missiles destroyed outside Kandahar. I watched the video of his death, watched him burn." Elena's hands tightened on the controls. "Then you know I don't miss." "You have no weapons," Khalid said. "But I do." On her threat warning receiver, a new tone. Not a missile log, something else. Portable radar, a targeting system. Elena looked down at the southern ridge through her targeting pod. Enhanced thermal. She saw Khalid clearly now, standing in the open, holding something on his shoulder. Another SA-18 manpads, his last missile, and he was aiming it personally. "You should have stayed grounded, pilot," Khalid said. "You should have stayed broken, but you came back. And now you die like your wingman died, screaming into a radio while fire consumes you." The missile launched, white plume, accelerating, tracking. Elena had perhaps 4 seconds. She looked at her countermeasures panel. 0 flares, 0 chaff, nothing to fool the seeker head. She looked at her airspeed, 220 knots on one engine, not fast enough to outrun the missile. She looked at her altitude, 300 feet, not high enough to dive and gain energy. Below her, on the ground, Cross and his men had stopped running. They stood in the open, watching the Warthog, watching the missile, watching her die. Elena could eject, pull the handle, rocket out of the aircraft and parachute to the ground. She'd survive, but the Warthog would crash, and Cross was directly under her flight path. If she ejected, the aircraft would hit him. Blackwood's voice crackled over the radio from Ironclad Base. "Valkyrie, eject! Elena, eject now!" She looked at the ejection handle. Then she looked at the 6 men on the ground who'd survived because she'd come back. Her hand moved away from the ejection handle. "Negative," she said quietly. "I bring her down or I don't come down." 3 seconds to impact. Elena pulled the stick hard right and dove toward the deck. The missile followed, its motor burning bright. 2 seconds. She saw terrain ahead, a rocky outcropping, 30 feet tall, between her and the missile. She flew straight at it. 1 second. At the last possible instant, Elena pulled up, the Warthog's belly clearing the rocks by inches. The SA-18 missile, traveling at Mach 2, couldn't match the maneuver. It slammed into the outcropping and detonated. The explosion was directly behind Elena's aircraft. The shockwave hit like a giant's fist, spinning the Warthog violently to the left. The damaged left wing, already stressed beyond tolerance, began to tear away from the fuselage. Metal screamed. Hydraulics burst. The aircraft entered a flat spin. Altitude, 600 feet and falling. Elena fought the controls. Nothing responded. The stick was dead in her hands. The rudder pedals useless. 400 feet. The Warthog spun like a leaf in a tornado, rotating twice per second, centrifugal force crushing her against the seat. 200 feet. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world was a blur of stars and sand and instrument lights that no longer meant anything. 100 feet. Through the chaos, through the spinning, Elena saw something. The dry lake bed, flat terrain, a mile to the east, if she could just reach it. 50 feet. She cut power to the remaining engine. The spin slowed fractionally. She deployed the speed brakes, creating drag on one side. The rotation decreased, still spinning, but slower now. 20 feet. The lake bed was ahead. She wasn't going to make it. Elena pulled the nose up with pure willpower, fighting against physics, against fate, against the mathematics that said this aircraft was already dead. The Warthog stopped spinning, nosed toward the lake bed. 10 feet. She held it level for 1 second. 2, 3. The wheels were still retracted. No time to lower them. This was going to be a belly landing. 5 feet. Elena crossed her arms over her face and braced. The A-10 Thunderbolt hit the desert floor at 180 knots. The impact was like being hit by a train. The entire aircraft compressed, every rivet and bolt crying out. The canopies shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. Elena's head snapped forward against the restraints, hard enough to split the skin on her forehead. The Warthog skidded across the lakebed, throwing up a rooster tail of dust and sparks. Metal tore. The right wing separated completely, tumbling away into the darkness. The left engine nacelle ripped free. 400 meters of destruction. Then 300. 200. The aircraft spun 170 degrees, sliding backward now, still shedding pieces. 100 meters. 50. The Warthog came to rest in a cloud of dust so thick it blocked out the stars. Silence. Just the tick of cooling metal and the hiss of leaking fluids. Then, from Ironclad Base, Blackwood's voice, desperate. "Valkyrie, Elena, respond." Nothing. "Valkyrie, do you copy?" Still nothing. On the ground 600 meters away, Cross stood frozen, staring at the dust cloud where the aircraft had disappeared. "No," he whispered, then louder. "No!" He started running toward the crash site, leg wound forgotten. The other SEALs followed. Inside the shattered cockpit, Elena hung in her restraints, head down, blood dripping from the cut on her forehead. Her ears were ringing. Her left ankle screamed with pain, probably sprained or broken. Her vision swam in and out of focus. She tried to move her hand. It responded, slowly. She reached up and found the canopy manual release. Pulled. The cracked canopy popped free with a hiss of hydraulics and fell away. Cool desert air rushed in. Elena fumbled with her restraint buckles. Took 3 tries. Her hands weren't working right. But finally the buckles released and she half fell, half climbed out of the seat. Getting out of the aircraft took 30 seconds that felt like an hour. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body. But she made it. She stood on the wing of the wrecked Warthog, one hand braced against the fuselage for support, the other raised in the air. In the distance, she could see lights approaching. Vehicles, Cross and his team. Elena touched the side of the aircraft one last time. The metal was still warm. "Thank you," she whispered. "You brought me home, just like you promised." Then her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the wing. The SEALs arrived 2 minutes later. Cross was first, climbing up to her, his face streaked with dirt and blood, and something that might have been tears. "You crazy, beautiful, insane woman," he said. "You came back. You actually came back." Elena managed a weak smile. "I promised, didn't I?" But it was Reeves who appeared next, having driven out from base with the QRF. He climbed onto the wing, pulled off his plate carrier, and extracted something from the inside pocket. His SEAL Trident pin. The one he'd earned after 2 years of the hardest training the military could devise. He held it out to her. "I can't take that," Elena said. "You earned it more than I did," Reeves replied. His voice was firm. "You saved 8 men tonight with an airplane that should have never flown. You went into a kill box designed for you, and you won. You are more of a warrior than I'll ever be." He pinned it to her flight suit, right over her heart. Elena looked down at it. The golden eagle, the anchor, the trident, the pistol. She thought about Davis, about all the men she'd brought home over 62 missions, about the 6 men standing around her now. "Thank you," she said quietly. Senior Chief Mackenzie stepped forward, the big Scottish man who doubted her in the beginning. His face was softer now. "My daughter wants to be a pilot," he said. "When I tell her about tonight, I'm going to tell her to be like you. Brave, unbreakable, a guardian." The QRF Marines arrived 30 minutes later in Humvees, along with medical personnel from Ironclad Base. They loaded Elena onto a stretcher, despite her protest that she could walk. As they carried her toward the vehicles, she looked back one last time at the Warthog. The aircraft was finished. Fuselage cracked in 4 places, both engines destroyed, wing torn off, avionics fried. But it had done its job. It had brought her home. And through her, it had saved lives, just like Davis had asked. 3 days later, forward operating base Ironclad was quieter. The threat at Devil's Canyon had been neutralized. Colonel Khalid al-Mazari had been captured alive by the Marines and was awaiting transfer to a secure facility. Elena sat outside the medical tent in the morning sun, her left arm in a sling, 17 stitches in her forehead, watching as a flatbed truck carried the remains of Warthog 17 away. Crew Chief Thompson walked over and stood beside her. "She's done, ma'am," he said. "Fuselage is cracked clean through. Both engines are scrapped. The airframe's bent past tolerance. She'll never fly again." Elena nodded slowly. "But she brought me home." "That she did." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Commander Blackwood approached, a folder under his arm. "Captain Thorne," he said formally, "Central Command has been briefed on the operation. They've reviewed the after-action reports, the helmet cam footage, the radio intercepts." Elena waited. "They're forming a new unit," Blackwood continued. "Joint Special Operations Air Wing. A-10 pilots trained specifically for high-risk, close air support missions. They want you to lead it." Elena looked up at him. "Sir, I'm grounded. I haven't been cleared for flight duty since—" "You're cleared now," Blackwood interrupted. "As of this morning, full reinstatement, and a promotion to major if you accept the position." Elena stared at the folder he was holding out to her. Inside would be orders. A new assignment, a new beginning. She thought about Davis, about the notebook, about the promise she'd made. Slowly, she reached out and took the folder. "I accept, sir." Blackwood smiled. It was the first time she'd seen him smile. "Outstanding. You report to Nellis Air Force Base in 6 months. They'll have your new aircraft waiting." He saluted. She returned it with her good arm. As Blackwood walked away, Cross appeared. His leg was bandaged, but he was mobile. "So," he said, "you're leaving us. In 6 months. You'll have to manage without me until then." Cross grinned. "I think we'll survive. We've got a guardian angel watching over us now." Elena shook her head. "I'm not an angel, Lieutenant. I'm just a pilot who got a second chance." "No, ma'am," Cross said seriously. "You're Valkyrie, and that means something now. It means when the mission is impossible, and the odds are 0, and everyone else has given up, you're the one who shows up anyway. You're the one who brings people home." He offered his hand. She shook it. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." 6 months later, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, January. Major Elena Thorne stood in a massive hangar, looking at 15 brand-new A-10 Thunderbolt II aircraft, lined up in perfect formation. Each one painted in standard Air Force gray. Each one equipped with the latest avionics and weapons systems. But the lead aircraft was different. On its nose, painted in white letters, Valkyrie 2. Below that, smaller, for Captain Jeremiah Davis, KIA, August 15th, 2021, never forgotten. 14 other pilots stood at attention beside their aircraft. Women between 24 and 32 years old. Graduates of the most rigorous training program the Air Force had ever devised. Elena walked down the line, meeting each pilot's eyes. She stopped at the end and turned to face them. "They're going to doubt you," she said. Her voice carried through the hangar without her having to shout. "Not because you're not good enough, but because you're different from what they expect. They'll look at you and see someone who doesn't fit their mental picture of a warrior." She paused. "The aircraft will fail you. Missions will go wrong. You'll be asked to do things that seem impossible. And there will be moments when you wonder if you made a mistake, if you should have chosen an easier path." Elena looked at each of them in turn. "But if you remember why you fly, to bring warriors home, to be the shield that stands between ground troops and death, to be the guardian that shows up when everyone else has given up, then nothing can ground you. Not doubt, not fear, not impossible odds." She touched the seal trident pin on her chest. "You are Valkyries now, all of you. That's not just a call sign, it's a promise. When someone calls for help, we answer. When someone is in danger, we fly into the fire, and we bring them home, always." The pilot stood straighter. Something had changed in the hangar. An understanding had passed between them. Elena walked to her aircraft, climbed the ladder, paused at the canopy and looked at Davis's name painted on the fuselage. "We did it, Jeremiah," she said softly. "We brought them home." She climbed into the cockpit. The seat felt right, the controls familiar, like coming home after a long journey. One by one, the other pilots climbed into their aircraft. Engines started. 15 A-10s coming to life simultaneously, the sound like rolling thunder. The tower radio crackled. "Valkyrie flight, you are cleared to taxi. Cleared for takeoff on runway 21. Winds calm. Good hunting." Elena smiled. She pulled on her helmet, the one with Guardian stenciled on the side. She keyed her mic. "Valkyrie flight, this is Valkyrie lead. Let's go bring them home." 15 warthogs taxied in formation. 15 warriors ready to face whatever came next. They took off one by one, climbing into the Nevada sky, disappearing into the sun. On the ground, Commander Blackwood stood watching with Senior Chief Mackenzie and Lieutenant Reeves beside him. "Think they're ready?" Mackenzie asked. Blackwood was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "They learned from the best, and the best taught them that it's not about being fearless. It's about being willing to fly into the fear anyway. for the right reasons. He watched until the last A-10 disappeared into the distance. "Yeah," he said, "they're ready." In a cell at a secure military facility, Colonel Khalid al-Mazari sat on a metal bunk, staring at a photograph he'd been allowed to keep. Two young men in Iraqi Air Force uniforms, smiling. Brothers. Before the wars. Before the loss. An American intelligence officer sat across from him. "You could have escaped after you fired that last missile," the officer said. "Your men scattered. We didn't catch you for 3 hours. Why did you stay?" Khalid was silent for a long time. Then he touched the photograph, his brother's face. "Because I had to see if she survived," he said quietly. "The American pilot, Valkyrie." "Why?" Khalid looked up. His eyes were tired, old. "Because she is what I failed to become. A pilot who flies not for glory or revenge or pride, but for those on the ground who cannot save themselves. Even my brother, if he could see what she did that night, would have respected her." He placed the photograph face down on the bunk. "Tell me," he said, "did she survive the crash?" The intelligence officer considered the question, then nodded. "She did, and she's flying again." Khalid closed his eyes. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Good," he said. "The sky needs warriors like her. I am glad I did not kill her. The world is better with guardians in it." The officer left him alone with his thoughts. Outside, the sun was setting. Somewhere in the distance, aircraft engines could be heard. Training flights, pilots learning their craft, preparing for wars that might never come, or might come tomorrow. And among them, flying higher and faster than the rest, a formation of A-10 Thunderbolts. The Valkyries, the Guardians, ready to answer the call, ready to bring warriors home, always.